some interesting storylines as well as getting into our positional review series this week on the Wandering Buffalo podcast. Get your hands on stylish t-shirts, hoodies, and more at wearbuff.com. That's wearbuff.com. And make sure to use the promo code TWB at checkout for 20% off your first order. Stay Buffalo proud with Wear Buff.
You're now listening to the Wandering Buffalo podcast with your host, Justin Godford.
Bills Mafia, welcome in and thank you for joining me on another episode of the Wandering Buffalo podcast, a show on the Buffalo Fanbase Podcast Network. My name is Justin and I am your host. And today on this week's episode, I've been wanting to get into a positional review series, and I try to get all this done pretty quickly so we can start moving into, free agency, draft talk, and really just kind of explore each position group, what the Bills have, what they might need going forward. But this offseason so far has been kind of sprinkled with some more interesting notes than we usually get at this point. And there are some talking points that I've been getting asked a lot about when I'm just, having casual conversations with the Bills. So I do want to get into the positional review series. I also want to, give some of my thoughts on some of the spicier issues, and some of that will kind of fold into the review series. So today we are going to cover quarterback, fullback, tight end, maybe get into the wide receiver group a little bit. But that being said, like I said, some of these spicy issues, we're talking James Cook, we're talking, what do we do with Amari Cooper, thoughts on Von Miller. So I want to get into some of that. And then, like I said, as we're going to dive into the review series, and as we get to each position group, kind of address some of those things more in depth. So real easy starting out the quarterback room. You got Josh Allen. Easy peasy, right? So obviously Josh Allen, absolutely awesome, coming off an MVP season. This gets into the conversation of, really what do you do backing up a quarterback like that? And for quite some time now, we've pretty much seen it be, somebody that Allen's close with. For a while, it was, like a veteran mentor, that type of thing he doesn't need anymore. I'm cool with it being, a friend in the room. I've been a pretty big proponent for a while of using some later round draft capital to, invest into a guy with some tools and kind of see what happens. And interestingly enough, I think that was kind of the Joe Milton game when we played the Patriots week 18. And it was, somebody that you'd expect, very little from, and not much for expectations. And, circumstances mattered, playing backups and whatnot, but dude looked nice. And you get a few games like that on film, and worst case scenario, you had a backup quarterback that you invested very little in, and maybe in 2 years, somebody gets desperate for a quarterback and you flip them for a higher draft pick. And I think that's the type of thing that could happen with the Bills with all of the offensive infrastructure. A guy could come in for some garbage time or whatever and put some stuff on tape and turn some heads. But as it stands now, obviously coming out of last season with Mitch Trubisky and Mike White, and nothing really much to report on with these guys. They played very limited snaps throughout the season, mostly, some garbage time, hand the ball off, take some knees. But the interesting layer here, I think, is the extension that Mike White got done towards the end of this past season. To me, it kind of spells the end for Mitch Trubisky. There's, you know, no need to spend cap there. You already have Mike White. And, I assume a third quarterback will be added. Maybe it will be just that, somebody through the draft that has some sort of tools that, we might be able to build on. My guess is it'll end up being, some sort of bargain bin free agent, run the scout team, and, kind of par for the course that we've seen. But I will say there was the year that we drafted Jake Fromm in the 5th round, and that never really amounted to anything. But perhaps, the vision was there of this kind of being a system that they wanted to, bring a guy in, see if you can develop him a little bit. Cheap contract. If they develop it all, maybe, you get to the end of their contract there, towards the end of it, and you're like, yeah, cool, we still got Josh Allen. Flip you for a pick somewhere. So I think it's interesting that strategy of at least taking a flyer on a guy existed at some point. Maybe it's something we'll see again. The running back room is where we get a little bit interesting here. And obviously by now we've all seen it. James Cook, went to the social medias about his contract and, pinned something on Instagram saying $15 million a year. Subsequently, removed Bill's posts and the Bills out of his bio and all that jazz. And I honestly, like, I get it to an extent. Like, these are things that players have done, and with the social media aspect of things becoming ever more prevalent, it's an effective way to get things out there, gauge. Other teams can see that as well, and know what you're looking for. I don't like this approach. I think it it just doesn't vibe with me when I'm thinking about like a locker room setting. And I know these dudes are all like family and they all want to see each other get the bag, and maybe us as fans kind of like read into it too much. Maybe it's not as big of a deal in the locker room. I just I don't like the feeling of taking to social media, expressing, your dislike for your current situation. I, from a player's perspective, I'm sure it has its value and has its leverage, all that kind of stuff. But, especially doing it when he's just becoming extension eligible. He's still under contract for next season. Do I agree with him that he deserves a pay bump? Yep, absolutely. It's hard to argue against that. He was one of our most consistent offensive weapons last year. He made big plays in the championship game. He was a very good running back for the team this year. I just don't necessarily enjoy that way of doing business. As far as the contract itself goes, the one of the major things that I hear is, well, you can't pay him that contract. It's more than Saquon Barkley. And that one right off the bat, I immediately am taking that off the table. It's just the way contracts go in the NFL. The market's always resetting, the cap's always going up. People got to get paid. You use comparables, people make more money, things reset, so on and so forth. And I think the easy and maybe best example of that is Josh Allen. And however you want to rank your quarterbacks, I'm not huge on the tier listing things, but you can put Josh Allen at worst 4th in the league in terms of quarterback play. And with his contract, he currently sits somewhere 14, 15, 16, something like that. There's going to be more extensions coming through, and he'll get his deal redone at some point, and it'll reflect, the caliber of his play. But just using the easy answer of that's making more than player X that I think is better. It's just, to me, kind of lazy that way. We all know how the NFL works. We all know the price tag constantly goes up. What I will say is, if we're going to do the game of comparing the contracts to players like Saquon or Derrick Henry, Christian McCaffrey, these upper echelon running backs that have gotten paid, to me, what makes Cook's contract complicated is, yes, he's an outstanding player. Yes, he has tremendous value. He's also a running back that plays sub 50% of the snaps. He is not, the finisher to end games, to end halves. He's not very often the third down running back because he's not really trusted in pass protection. And some of the usage is, I put on the coaching staff, like, it's not like he couldn't handle 55%, whatever. There's also, context of games being kind of wrapped up, and what's the need to have him out there. There's all kinds of stuff that goes into this. But for me, at the end of the day, he's not an 80% snap guy. Has a history of the coaching staff not trusting him in pass protection. And I do think that kind of stuff matters when you're talking about top of the market for running backs. I think you'd like to see that snap share up in the 80% range when you're talking $15 million a season. Now, as far as getting an extension done for him, I'm not opposed to that. I just think the number looks a little bit different if we're being fair to both the Bills and James Cook. And I think that number would come in somewhere like the 10 to 12 per year range. And, it feels like almost semantics of, okay, so you're going to not extend a really good player over a few $1 million. But it comes into it, the guaranteed money, the structure of it, the Bills being a team that not only already have some sizable contracts, but you have other guys to extend coming up here, and Shakir, Benford, Bernard. Like, what priority are you putting these things in? You have areas in the team that need to be improved. What does that look like? Can you do it all through the draft? Is there free agency dollars being spent? So it seems kind of small and minuscule to just look at and be like, it's a few $1 million, just give it to them. It all ends up mattering at the end of the day. And honestly, I could see the Bills getting a deal done with him, despite probably being pretty far off right now. James Cook coming out and saying $15 million, like, it's a name high mentality, right? Like, shoot for the stars. I think he realistically, he could realistically expect that, but you also get to the negotiating table and start doing the math of, a 10, $11 million deal, but you get this much in guarantees and incentive, all the stuff that goes into it. So it feels discouraging right now. If you're, somehow not a fan of James Cook and you don't want him around at all, maybe you're psyched right now. If you are a fan of his and you don't want to see him leave the team, I think it's just important to know that, this is like, that was him doing like a public first move of like, hey, this is what I want. What's your counter? And like I said, he's only becoming extension eligible right now. He's still under contract for next year. We'll see what happens. Maybe there's a world where they've already been kind of having their conversations and it just doesn't feel like it's going to get done. And maybe you see him get flipped for a pick that they're able to use for something. Uh, where this is now, February 18th versus where it could end up, it could go any number of directions for me. So wait and see what happens there. But I still have a pretty strong inkling that James Cook is going to end up signing an extension with the Bills. From James Cook possibly signing an extension to somebody that I would really love to be brought back, and that's Ty Johnson. And I think this running back room overall just performed really well this season. It's hard to really sit here and want to do anything different with it. It's the NFL. Things change quickly. It's a new team every year, right? Ty Johnson, I thought, was really great in a number of areas. He contributes on special teams. When we talk about, James Cook not really being like the finisher of halves in games, and the pass pro option, and all of the things that I feel like we don't really lean on James Cook to do is basically what Ty Johnson does. Thought he was great in pass protection. He has some sort of ridiculous chemistry with Josh Allen that, he's all of a sudden your third down running, or your third string running back, in there for pass pro, ends up down the field making these ridiculous catches, looking like he was wide receiver one. Just kind of has that innate ability to be on the same page with Josh Allen when things break down and we're out of structure, and he finds a way to get open. He finds a way to make himself available and make the play. The other thing here for me is I think it's a role that you're going to look to fill regardless of what happens with Cook. Maybe you're drafting Cook's replacement. Maybe you think it's Ray Davis. I think that position still has value for a guy like Ty Johnson. And if you're going to fill that role anyways, I mean, Ty Johnson's going into either his 7th or his 8th year. I believe it's his 7th. And it's not like he's going to get this crazy contract to, oh, we saw what you did in Buffalo. We think you're RB1. We'll give you $6 million a year, 7, whatever. It's kind of, he is who he is at this point in his career. And I think it's a very high-end RB3, maybe RB2 in some places. And just kind of for the sake of continuity, seeing what he's done with this team, I think it's a no-brainer to bring him back. And then finally, Ray Davis. Limited action in what we, saw from him in his rookie year. But what we did see from him was pretty awesome. And, if you've been listening to this show for a while, I was super psyched about Ray Davis when we drafted him. My bold offseason prediction was that he was more stylistically what the team was looking for, and that by the end of the season he would, end up taking the quote unquote bell cow role from James Cook. Now, we did see that was absolutely empirically false, did not happen. But we did see Ray Davis get some pretty significant usage, and it just seems like every time he was given an opportunity, he was flashing. And he contributed in the passing game. He had solid runs. We had one game that James Cook missed, and he went for over 150 scrimmage yards and showed a nose for the end zone. And he just has a really great skill set he's my style running back of, he's got not necessarily the breakaway, run away from you speed, but he's fast, physical. He's the type of running back that I look for, especially in this type of offense that has Josh Allen, and you don't need your running back to be the player that's breaking the game open for you. It's when you want to use the run, can you consistently get 4 or 5 plus yards? And that's the type of running that I see from Ray Davis. It's physical, it's cut, get downhill, and then he's got the wheels to break a big one if the right situation presents itself. And I think more than anything, and we'll get into this when we get to the offensive line, I think it's just that. I think this offensive line was awesome in front of these running backs. And yes, there's differences, there's tiers and skill levels. But when you are that good up front, you're going to make a lot of running backs look real nice. And with the continuity that should, and I don't see how, barring any, offseason injuries, that offensive line should still be very much intact. I think this could be kind of like a Tremaine Edmonds situation where, like, we really like this dude in James Cook. We really, appreciate everything he does. We acknowledge that he's a very good player, but we have to make concessions to the cap in certain places. And, for Edmonds, it was Bernard coming up through the ranks. And that one was a little bit more of a question mark to us because we hadn't really seen Bernard play. But this could be a situation where it's like, yeah, dude, we really like you, but if the numbers affirm 15, we can't do it. And we got Ray Davis waiting in the weeds. We'll go into the draft and take the next guy and repeat this cycle. And that's kind of always the stance that I've had on running backs is, invest. Like, don't be afraid to invest the draft capital in these dudes. And I'd stay away from first round, but second, third, fourth round, pretty significant investments at the position, and let them play out their rookie contract and just keep feeding the pipeline. And in theory, I still think that's a very sound strategy, and I want to continue that strategy. It's a whole nother thing to put the face of James Cook on that strategy and be like, yeah, we're good without you. And, like I said, he was one of the most dangerous and consistent weapons that the team had this year. So it's it's a lot easier to do that gymnastics in my head when I don't have to, put it into practice with my guy James Cook. So we'll see what happens there. Like I said, again, I could see this going any different number of directions. I think this will be probably the spiciest talking point all throughout the offseason. Moving into the tight end room, kind of group these all together. A little bit more to talk about, a little less to talk about. And the tight end room, there's really not much for needs here. I think the biggest thing here is, there's some fans out there that, are kind of let down by the contract that Dawson Knox got, and is he performing to that contract level? Yada yada yada. The basic easy math here is there's really no good way to move on from Dawson Knox, and I think it's one of the situations where both things can be true. That, like, yes, he didn't really perform up to what he got for his contract, but also, like, there's not really a need to move on from him. I think he does provide a lot at the position with his blocking. He still has some receiving ability. He has that potential to, and we saw it several times last year where he just kind of gets lost by the defense and snags a 30-yard ball. And to me, could you want more out of him for the price tag? Yeah, that's absolutely fair. I think it's also kind of important context of this team philosophy of everybody eats. That's still going to have its tiered distributions, right? Like there's still going to be a pecking order. And when you look at it as like Dawson Knox can be your sixth, seventh option that you're looking at in the passing game, like, yeah, that I'm good with that. Again, could it be cheaper? Sure. This is one of the contracts where they kind of bet on the continued development and it kind of plateaued. And it is what it is. It's not the greatest contract. It's not the worst. And it's a guy that at that dollar sign is still going to be contributing to your team. You're still going to get return on investment. It's just not the sexiest look for a position that, is involved with the passing game. I think the things that he does provide to the team outside of catching the ball is very valuable and will continue to be. Dalton Kincaid, obviously a bit of a disappointing season here compared to the trajectory that we saw coming out of his rookie year. He had a fantastic rookie year, and it was very exciting to see what he would do in year two. Then, the removal of Diggs from the equation and, the investment made in Dalton Kincaid, the rookie year that we saw from him, and it really felt like he was set up to just really pop off in year two. And I think there's a few factors that go into this. Number one being injuries, and number two being just kind of chemistry with Josh Allen. And they're tune into Locked On Bills. Joe Marino gets free plugs for me all the time. He does a really good job of breaking down the exact numbers and everything. Josh Allen and Dalton Kincaid just weren't quite on the same page, and there were a lot of throws where Kincaid is open or open enough, and just the throw's a little bit off. And the one that really comes to mind is the one where he ends up injuring his knee, kind of laying out for a ball from Josh Allen that he had like 3 yards of separation. He was going to walk in for a touchdown, and Josh Allen just puts it a yard or two too far, and Kincaid lays out for it and ends up hurting his knee. This is a spot where I'm still super psyched for what the ceiling is. Like, we saw what he looked like in his rookie season. He didn't forget how to football. Give him another offseason with Josh Allen. Let him heal up from them bumps and bruises. We've heard McDermott and Bean talk about, wanting him to put on some more functional weight, hopefully lead to some more durability, consistency. And I think the sky's still the limit for Dalton Kincaid. And I think we just saw this success of everybody eats mindset, philosophy. And I don't think that's going anywhere. That's going to keep the tight ends involved. I think this is going to be, we talk about these year 3 jumps that we've seen from a bunch of players on the Bills. And it's usually more of like a step-by-step progression. For Kincaid, I think it's going to be, he started out a little bit higher and dipped down in his second year. And year 3, I think he's really going to take off. Rounding out the room, tight end 3, Quentin Morris. And not really much to say on Quentin Morris here other than he's kind of my ideal perfect tight end 3. He's capable enough at blocking, capable enough as a receiver. He comes open and snags a touchdown seemingly at least once a year. And doing that in very limited snaps is pretty dope. He contributes on all areas of special teams and just an all-around, low-cost, valuable tight end 3. And it's not sexy. It's not something we're going to talk about a ton. But he gets the job done. And do want to sprinkle into this conversation Zach Davidson, kind of a camp darling last season. And I see it going into this next season with a similar competition there, and it ending up being Davidson and Morris for, duking it out for that position. In my opinion, I think Davidson has shown some flashes, kind of more in the receiving department. But for all of the things that Quentin Morris does, his continuity with the team, his special teams contributions, I think it's just a huge uphill battle to fight for Davidson. And it'll happen again this year because we'll see Davidson in preseason. He's going to make some plays and the hype train will get rolling for him again. I don't see a world where he is able to unseat Q Morris and he's been that dude for the Bills for several years now. So I think that's a bigger uphill battle to climb than a lot of people will give it credit for once we get to preseason and Davidson's making some noise again. The last position group I want to round out here is the fullback room. And this one's pretty simple to me too. Reggie Gilliam, I love that dude. Needs a new contract, give it to him. His usage this year was at an all-time high. I think he's a key part in the success that we were able to have on the ground. He can play a little tight end in a pinch. It's a good blocker. Steady dude. Bring him back. Keep it rolling. I think that's pretty easy there. So going into next week, got to kind of do my roadmap here and how long I think it'll take to go through each group. But we're going to get into more on the offensive side of the ball. At the very least, we're going to do the offensive line and wide receivers. I know Amari Cooper is a big talking point out there. And there's a lot going on with the offensive line. So make sure you're subscribed. Get a notification every week so you're not missing any episodes. It'd be great if you could share, tell a friend about the show if you're enjoying it. Just got a notification yesterday. The pod has officially hit its 4-year anniversary, so we're going into year 5 here. So I want to thank everybody that's, been listening to the show from the very humble beginnings to anybody that's jumped on board along the way, anybody that's brand new to the show. Appreciate you all listening, taking the time out of your day to check out my thoughts on the Bills. As I've kind of mentioned a few times going in, as we get into this offseason, we're doing some revamping with the website. We have, more writers, more articles coming up. If you prefer reading fully fleshed out thoughts, getting content different ways. Producer Jake has started doing quick hit, opinion videos. Check those out. Check out the merch. We got a lot going on. So check it all out. Most importantly, make sure you're subscribed so you're not missing any episodes. We'll see you next week. Until then, and as always, go Bills.